Yeah, good morning. Tom, what are the financial risks for UK actors working and touring in the EU since Brexit?
I think they have to make a series of very complicated judgments now about whether they want to take jobs that are offered to them, especially jobs that are kind of EU-based companies. The taxation system is very, very complicated. It's not always obvious so the source country applies tax to the wages that you get while you're on tour, and then you can claim that back through your self-assessment. But it's not always clear what the source country is going to apply tax to, and therefore what payment you're going to get at the end of the day, and what you're going to have to wait to get back from your self-assessment, whether you're going to get everything back through the self-assessment, etc., etc. So that's quite a big deal for people. Then there's the issue around the A1 forms, and we've had issues of opera singers where their payment has been withheld until they can submit the A1 form, which the current waiting period is 7 months to get out of HMRC. And then there's the kind of question of, well, should I take this job if I might get something in the UK that will be better paid or less complicated? There's a kind of judgment about, do you want to take an EU job and block out that time in your diary, or do you want to wait for something that might be easier? So it's a very complicated. I guess the final thing is also about calculation of the 90 days. Where do you want to kind of use your 90 days? Do you want to use it for work? Do you have a family member, for example, who's living in Europe you might need to care for? Is your partner have family in Europe that you might need to visit? So UK performers have to make these very, very difficult judgments, and often agreeing to work where they don't know what they're actually going to get at the end of the day, and what implication it's going to have on their ability to work in Europe or in the UK in the future.
Yeah, it sounds as though, particularly if you don't have that money to put up front, that's quite a big gamble if you might be looking at 7 months to get paid.
Yeah, so I mean, for commercial tours, the UK producer will often meet the cost of accommodation, for example. So there's varying degrees of how much money a UK performer will have to put up at any one time. But I think actually the real question is, what are the earnings that I'm going to get back? So we had a member whose accommodation in a member state was taxed at source by that member state, even though it had been paid for by the producer. So they thought that they were going to pay tax on their earnings and their per diems, the daily living allowance that they get, and then they find that they've actually had the accommodation treated as a benefit in kind by the source country. So instead of getting £600 a week, they've suddenly found they got £300 a week, for example. And there's also that arrangement is different in every single EU member state that they might be working.
You and Matt, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I've actually got an example payslip in front of me. I mean, looking here, this artist's total gross income of 1 month was about €4,170, and in total they've been taxed, social security. They also paid this is Austrian withholding tax, and something that's called like an artist pension tax, which is basically a benefit for artists to use when they're out of work. But obviously, as a UK actor, when you're working there, you don't really see that benefit because you're coming back to the UK, so you're not sort of reaping the benefits of what that pension is. It's also a compulsory thing you have to pay, and if you want to get that money back, you have to pay into it for a year before you can get it back. So if you're doing a 6-month job, you have to carry on paying 6 months worth of contributions even after you finish the job to be able to get that money refunded back to you.
Right, during which you might be out of work.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
All I'd add is that the A1 certificate is required per country, so it isn't as simple as a one A1 that covers all of Europe. You need to get one for each territory, and if the territories in which you're going to work in alter during the tour, you're not going to get that in time, even if you had time to get it in the first place. So it just answers the complication.
Thank you. Tom, you already mentioned that it can take 7 months to process the A1 forms. How common is it for performers working in the EU to have to be unpaid, to have a delay to their pay?
We have had that a lot from members, especially that's a real issue that has come through our singers committee, so especially around opera. That they just have, we've had a series of complaints where members have had their total pay withheld until they can provide the form. So often they go and do the work, and then they're waiting for several months for the money to actually come through.
You and Matt, did you have anything to add to that response?
On the A1 forms, they don't accept digital copies. It needs to be a physical copy. So there's also an added delay there where you need to try and get the physical copy to these companies. I also want to add on the cost implications. Almost all actors have agents as representation, and they have to pay a commission to these agents for doing the work. So on top of all these taxes and on top of all these withholding taxes that they're having to pay, they're also paying a 12.5% commission to agents to help them manage these jobs and go through these pay slips and do this for them, which is also a commission on their gross payment, not their net payment. So that's an added thing that is being taken off their wages.
Yeah, thank you. How often do actors have to turn down EU work simply because they can't afford it? To Ewan, and then as follows.
It's difficult because, you know, there's an element of not desperation, but, you know, actors want to work. They really want to work. But sometimes, you know, they have to balance whether they want to do it, over the affordability of being able to do it. So I would say yes, I have had actors turn down jobs because it's just not feasible or affordable for them. Also, sometimes I've had actors who have been working away in Europe who've then come back and said, I never want to do that again because it's just not enjoyable for me. You know, there's too much paperwork, there are too many hurdles and loops and things to go through. You know, actors have walked midway through a contract, they've just gone, I actually can't afford this anymore. You know, and so, you know, and then, you know, that has a trickle-on effect to the producers and the rest of the cast. If, you know, cast members are walking midway through a contract, they can't put on the show, you know. So, yeah, I mean, again, I can't quantify how often that happens or how many times that happens, but in my experience, it does happen.
Is there any support to performers that are sort of jumping through those hurdles, either from your organisations or elsewhere?
I try where possible to help as much, but again, my experience only goes so far in terms of what I can tell them. You know, I'm not a tax specialist. I always advise getting an accountant. Again, that's an added expense for them to do. So, you know, I try where possible, but, you know, I work for a company and, you know, I have a boss telling me we can't be liable for telling them something that might end up not being correct. You know, we always say we advise you to speak to a tax specialist about this. So, yeah.
Matt?
More than 4/5 of those who responded to our call for evidence reported that they were aware it was more expensive post-Brexit, the whole process of going through the visa applications and the paperwork to get to work in Europe. Those are those that are aware of it, and there are many more that are kind of protected by their agents, by others, from the realisation of the costs of it. I think the real challenge is that people do not have the opportunity to turn down work. And so they will go for work even when it is cost prohibitive. And often we'll see the charities in our sector, the benevolent funds and others who will step in to support performers when they're suffering hardship. But our organisation is not able to provide that support, that financial support directly.
Thank you. Tom?
I mean, a major source of income for our opera singers used to be short-term cover. So if a principal was ill in, say, a house in Italy, one of our opera singers would get a very quick last-minute call saying, we've got a sick principal, can you immediately come over and cover the role for a week or whatever it was? And what we're increasingly seeing is that just the administrative complexities make that very, very difficult. So it's less about affordability, but more about people saying, oh, hold on a minute, can we actually do everything that needs to be done to facilitate that performer to come over for a short period of time? We had one instance where someone had actually ended up in a correspondence with the Italian embassy about doing one night in Italy, and had a letter from the Italian embassy that she took over and showed at the border and eventually managed to get the job for one night. But that's the sort of level that people are going to try and understand whether they're actually legally allowed to do the job or not.
Can I just add one more thing? I can only speak on behalf of my company, Global Artists, but we an unwritten rule, I guess, that we always take the equity minimum rates in the UK as the base rate of pay to take a full 12.5% commission. I have had clients who are being paid less than that in Europe. I think it's €350 per week for rehearsals and €450 per week for performances. And in that instance, we calculate the difference between the equity minimum, which I think is 560 something, and we reduce our commission rate to reflect that reduce. So that's just an example of what our companies sometimes do to help with the cost implications, but that then has a trickle-on effect on agents' income and how much the business, our agency as a business, is taking. I don't know what other agencies do in those situations, but that's just an example of how we try and help financially.
Thanks, Chair.